Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Rahel Solomon. For the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be exploring ways to enhance your marketing strategy, which is now more important than ever as we see the pandemic really change consumer behavior. Joining me today is Eric Siu. He is the chairman of Leveling Up and the co-host of the Marketing School podcast. Before we start, though, I do want to remind everyone that we want to hear from you. So please use the text chat to the right of your screen to post questions and comments and join the discussion. I'm going to try to incorporate as much of those as I can from the chat into our session today. Eric, thanks so much for being with us. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. As I told you, as we were waiting, my mom is a small business owner. I have a lot of family members who are small business owners. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this today. So let's start with, how can people think about M&A or mergers and acquisitions as a marketing channel? I think you told me that you want to sort of strip away, the big and scary acronym and sort of make it more relevant. Let's start there.
Totally. And thanks for having me, Rahel. When you think about M&A, people are like, oh my God, private equity, maybe it's something that's not for me. Maybe it's for the big holding companies out there. But when you think of M&A, what you're doing is you're actually buying growth. And so, actually the very first company that successful company that worked out was a company that I took over, which is called Single Grain, which is an ad agency. And, I learned the ropes of business, but then I also got a lot of leverage around the business too, because not only did I, take the revenues for the company, the clients and all that, but I also acquired a marketing channel in that they had a very strong blog as well, right? So I was looking at their marketing assets. They had a strong blog with, good amount of traffic. They had an email list as well. So I encourage you to not only just look at the marketing assets, but look at what other assets you can pick up if you are acquiring a company. And I'll kind of just leave it at that. And we'll say, hey, look, if you're interested in learning more about it, there's actually a really good book called Buy Then Build.
Interesting. Okay. Always nice to have good book recommendations. So let's talk about, you're starting out as a business owner. I would imagine that most of your focus is operations, just selling whatever it is your product or your service is. But how does a small business owner even begin to start thinking about marketing when they're just starting out?
Yeah, I think the future of businesses are going to require media, right? And so actually Bill Gates said this in the 90s. Most companies are going to become media companies, and we're seeing that happen today. And so I think the most important thing to do in the very beginning is to focus on just one channel. A lot of people will look at, the Gary V's of the world out there where they're pumping out content across all the platforms. Just keep in mind, his brand team has 30 to 40 people on. And one guy that used to work for me works very closely with Gary V now. So he tells me kind of what goes on behind the scenes there. And so, if you focus on one channel first, whether you're really good at, if you want to serve B2B customers, maybe you focus on LinkedIn there because the organic reach is very good. If you post something, thousands of people can potentially see it. If you're doing consumer, maybe it's TikTok. And maybe if you're really good at video, maybe it's YouTube, right? So pick one channel first, nail it, and then scale it, and then think about diversifying to other channels.
That's interesting. So even TikTok, I was always sort of curious about whether TikTok was actually translating into real dollars and cents for businesses. And you feel like depending on what you're selling, even a platform that reaches a young audience like TikTok could be good?
Yeah. So if you are selling e-commerce products to maybe Gen Zs, right, as an example, TikTok might make a lot of sense, and people are just spending all the time in the world there. And when you're doing TikTok, by the way, if you're doing TikTok well, that means the content that you have, you can probably repurpose it to YouTube Shorts, which is their version of it. Then you have Instagram Reels, and then there's Snapchat or Snap Spotlights. So you have a lot of different options to repurpose there.
When a company is thinking about, I know you just mentioned thinking about maybe one medium or one channel. When a company is even just thinking about their marketing strategy, what questions should they be asking themselves, and what steps should they start off with?
Yeah, so they should be thinking about the number one thing when it comes to marketing is, where's my audience hanging out? So they could very well be hanging out on a Reddit forum. They could be hanging out on Instagram. So I think it's important to understand where they're hanging out first. And ideally, understanding that where it's very competitive from maybe an ad dollars perspective and maybe where it's not. So you're looking for a blue ocean versus a red ocean, and you want to go there first. And the reason why I wanted to start with M&A first is because, again, if you think about assets out there, ad costs from Facebook and Google are continuing to get more expensive. Where can you go buy an asset? Maybe someone has a Facebook group out there, or maybe someone has a good email list, right? Where can you go buy these assets? Maybe where they're under monetized. So as an example, not to get too complicated here, you can go buy a blog that's getting a lot of traffic, and maybe they're monetizing through Google Ads, right? So Google AdSense, they're running those ads on the site. That means they're under monetized. You can probably offer them a good deal for it, and then you can roll them into, maybe there's an e-commerce site that you have and you roll your products into that. And that's a strategy that a lot of businesses that have been using. And I don't think it's just limited to big businesses. I think small businesses can do the same as well.
So let's take a step back. So, let's say YouTube is your platform of choice, or TikTok or Twitter. There's one thing to choosing a platform. There's another thing to figuring out how to make it resonate, right? Like, I know with TikTok, I have 2 teenage brothers and they send me videos, and the things that really resonate on TikTok are things that are funny or interesting or short and quick. And so, how do you speak to, or how do you sort of figure out what that special magic is, or that special sauce is, to make it actually land, to make it worth watching and listening to?
Yeah. So Rahel, that's a really good question. I think when you're writing or creating any type of piece of content, instead of creating for the people out there, think about what's interesting to you and creating for yourself first. And that makes it a lot easier. And I think also it's important to get the suckage out of your body, meaning that you have to be very consistent in the beginning, and then you get better over time. And that's what it takes ultimately. It's just most people give up too early because they're focused on the wrong things. They're focused on, oh, I'm not getting enough views. Oh, not enough people are liking my stuff. But what they really should be looking for is, are they actually improving over time? And are there some people every now and then saying, hey, this is great, this has changed my life, right? You're not going to build an audience overnight, or even in 3 months, 6 months. The truth is, unless it's lightning in a bottle, it might take you 2 to 3 years to really start to build an audience.
Is there any way to quantify for people listening, what is enough? Is it 1 post a day? Is it 2 posts a day? Is it 1 video a week? I mean, how do you know what's the right sort of mix?
Yeah. So let's use YouTube as an example. So one of my buddies is a big YouTuber. He's got a couple million subscribers. And, he said he's looked at data. He's worked with a lot of people to help them grow their YouTube channels as well. And he said, look, it doesn't matter if you're posting 2 times a day or once a month. There are channels that are just huge, right? So I think it's figuring out what works for you, and not what any one person says out there, because a lot of people out there are making blanket statements. I think you have to find the mix that works for you. And what I would say too, your earlier question about how do you make it resonate, it's really understanding, if you focus on one channel, you have to understand how that channel works natively, and you have to post natively. So just because you post something to LinkedIn and it works doesn't mean if you copy and paste and you put it on Facebook, it's going to work. You have to kind of, play to the channel, right? So if I'm doing something well on LinkedIn, it's like a longer post. I might have to make it into a tweet storm, which is a threaded list of tweets, right? So we got to think about that, because if it looks like we're just cut and pasting, it's not going to work well.
I want to ask, on the one hand, it totally makes sense to sort of figure out which platform or which sort of media makes the most sense, but also, is there something to perhaps giving several of them a try to figure out what you're resonating with most, or where people, for example, there are YouTubers that I love that have millions of followers, and then when I go to their IG page, they have a couple thousand followers, and clearly it's not translating on one platform as well as it is on a different platform. And so I guess I wonder if you sort of pigeonhole yourself to Instagram, maybe perhaps you would resonate a lot better on YouTube. So is there something also to maybe figuring out where your audience really is and likes you the best?
Yeah, so I think it's really important in the beginning. The same thing with business. You have to learn before you earn. And so you have to learn one channel first, get it down, and you have an audience there, and then you can move them around, right? I think looking at Jake Paul or Logan Paul, they're big YouTubers now, but I believe they started from Vine first, and then same thing with Charli D'Amelio, started with TikTok, and now she's big on IG, YouTube. So I think you nail one first, and then you think about the rest. I think it's too much cognitive load when you're thinking about 5 or 6 different channels, because you're not even good at one yet. Why try to spread out? And same thing with business, right? Okay. Apple started with one product first, and now they have a bunch. So it's the same concept.
Yeah. And also I know just, from some of my friends in television, sometimes, burnout is real when you're on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. You're just, sort of all over the place. And so to your point, maybe it would serve you better, and maybe your mental health better to just kind of focus on one.
Well, I like to say like success is like a sphere. So you start in the middle and success is on all the edges. And then you go up, you're going to hit it. But if you keep going all over the place, you'll never get there. And to your point, I was actually talking to someone on the team yesterday. We just acquired a company. And so I was just, doing like a quick 15-minute meet and greet. And she's like, well, I manage 15 social media accounts and they don't get much engagement. And I'm like, I mean, there's no like, why that is, right? Because you're doing too many different things at once.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. While we're still on this subject, which platforms really have your attention these days, or what's exciting to you?
So Twitter is not the answer that people would expect, but Twitter to me is interesting because I do a lot of B2B work, and some of the smartest people, smartest investors, smartest tech people are on Twitter. And if a post takes off there, a lot of the right people see it. So it's for my audience, that's the right fit, right? Mm-hmm. But what I would say long term is, I'm most interested in YouTube. I think that aligns with everyone across the board, whether they're Gen Zers or people like myself, or YouTube is just continuing to compound. I believe about 15% quarter on quarter. So there's good discoverability there. And I think you can really build a brand there and build a business on top of it.
Yeah. I want to get to a user question, an audience question. So Patrick Freet says, who should you hire first when starting to market online? Content creator or social media specialist?
Interesting. So, I mean, if I had to work within the confines of that question, so a social media specialist, and actually to me, a creator and a social media specialist are kind of the same. A lot of people are hiring creators now, right? And what a creator means to me is someone that is specialized in one channel. And you don't want someone that says they're good at all channels, right? So that wouldn't necessarily be the first marketing hire I would make. My opinion is I would hire a virtual assistant or an assistant first to help me with offload a lot of the menial tasks, right? So scheduling tweets, looking, getting reports and things like that. And then I might think about someone on the social side, right? Because then maybe I've done a little bit of the work where I won't lose my shirt if someone says they know what they're doing and then I don't even know how to evaluate them, right? So I think getting your feet wet a little bit initially is good.
Are there some good platforms that you've turned to or that you've heard of that are good for finding a virtual assistant?
Yeah, so there's one called Hire. I think it's the Mom Project. So you can work with moms there, and Upwork is great as well. Those two are good starting points.
Okay. When do you think people should, that's a perfect segue to my next question. When do you think people should start thinking about, maybe I actually need to hire someone or outsource this? Or even to take it a step further, perhaps even hire an agency?
Yeah. So ironically, I have an agency, but I would recommend not hiring an agency at the beginning because they're incentivized to continue to charge you a monthly fee, right? And not necessarily incentivized to bring you the best work because they want to drag out the contract, right? So what I would say is, sorry, can you rephrase your question? I want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, for a small business owner, when is the right time to perhaps think about hiring someone for your marketing needs, whether that's a content creator or even a marketing agency?
Got it. Yeah. So the way I like to think about it is you have your $10 an hour tasks, $100, $1,000, $10,000, and so on. Ideally, as a business owner, you're focusing on the $100,000, $10,000 an hour task, right? So that could be hiring, building a cross-functional team, strategy, that type of stuff, or doing deals. $10 an hour task would be like scheduling. It could be like scheduling social media posts, right? So every quarter, what I like to do is think about what are the 10 to 50% of things I can be taking off my plate. And then I can slowly continue to move those $10 to $100 an hour tasks over to somebody else. Because that's the name of the game. It's delegation. And my friend actually wrote a good blog post on this. It's called Lazy Leadership. Go Google that.
Interesting title. I want to get to another audience question. David Frost asks, outside of media platforms, what are your top recommendations for successful B2B digital marketing?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people still make fun of SEO, but, I have a background in SEO, and I think it's one of the strongest channels you can use. And what that basically means is you can have a blog that drives a bunch of traffic from Google. And think about this. You have so much leverage there because you have a lot of free traffic coming to your website. You can collect more emails, you can pixel that data and retarget them through ads. And then you can publish something and it'll rank. Like whatever we tend to want to publish around marketing, it's going to rank pretty well. So I think you have an unfair leverage point there. And if you can't build it again, like we talked about M&A in the beginning, think about buying a website in your niche that works out.
Interesting. Has the pandemic changed your approach to marketing at all, or should it for someone at home?
Yeah, so long term, I think the ad platforms, they're just going to get more expensive over time. It's an auction-based system. It makes sense. So we talked about kind of owning assets, right? Owning email lists. We talked about owning blogs and things like that. But I think it's important to establish one channel first, like we talked about earlier, and then start to diversify. So we call it content sprouting. So for example, this video that we're just recording right here, we can actually make it into multiple podcasts, right? We can make it into multiple blog posts. Then we can promote the content as well. So we have an entire framework where we take one pillar piece, which would be this interview, and then chop it up into a bunch, and then go on YouTube, podcasts. But we're trying to take an omni-channel approach because, you know, people used to say that with marketing, it's a rule of 7. They have to see you 7 times to buy something. I actually believe it's maybe a rule of 20 or something like that now, because our attention span is so short.
Yeah, and to that end, you know, I mean, certainly on certain platforms more than others, but I think there is, you know, a fatigue of like constantly being bombarded with ads and buy my stuff, buy this, buy that. And so for a small business owner who's, you know, trying to sort of penetrate an audience or attract an audience, I mean, what's a good mix of, you know, purely professional ads and maybe some personal to just sort of like, you know, make it not so transactional?
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, I could speak from experience here. What's personally worked for me is just continually sharing knowledge. So I love learning, and then I love teaching because it articulates my learnings. And then when I'm learning in public, then my audience starts to compound over time. That's why I've been doing podcasts for over 8 years now. And then marketing school has been about 5 years. It compounds, the audience builds around it, and I'm just continuing to give. So I think over optimizing for maybe for every ask, you have 4 bits of value. That's one ratio that I like to use. And just keep doing that over and over, and then you'll build an unstoppable machine. I think, again, most people just give up too early.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Another viewer question was, how do you develop a short to long-term marketing plan?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's 2 there, but short term, I think it's just figuring out what works. And like I mentioned, you know, test a bunch of things initially, but don't try to do too many at once. Test one, move on to the next one, test, and then obviously set goals for it. Long term with marketing, it's figuring out, okay, where can you corner the market? Where do you have an unfair advantage? We talked about the audiences that you can buy there, but you know, beyond that, it's also hiring the best people at the end of the day. I used to think, because I led marketing at a lot of different technology startups, that it was most important to be the best marketer. And then you realize, as you get a little more experience with business, it's not about how to do it, it's about who can do it. And it's finding the absolute best people. And here's what I love about Twitter. You can see how someone thinks, you can see what they're sharing, you can see how they write on Twitter. And I generally look at Twitter as that's the resume now. I don't need a resume anymore. I can just look at who are the best creators, look at their Twitter, look at their Instagram, see how they think, DM them, and then figure out how can we work together. Even if it's paying you a couple $100 an hour for your time, and then establishing a relationship there, that just goes way further, because these people live on these platforms all day. There's no need to try to figure it all out once you start to get some more success with your business.
Okay. And I have one final question. And then for those watching, we are sort of winding down here. So if you have any last burning questions, now would be a good time to put that in the message box. But Eric, any sort of underutilized platforms or tools that you feel like aren't maybe considered as much, that you still think are tried and true and really effective?
Yeah. So this is becoming more popular now, but SMS, so, you know, messaging to people using something like Attentive would be great. I do think another thing is you can go to a site like microacquire.com, which is like a Zillow for M&A, and there you can go buy apps that are, you know, maybe in your niche, and then you can give that app away for free, and you can start to drive a bunch of leads to your business. That's another way. And
then Eric, if I can get you to answer this one really quickly because we're wrapping. Sean asks, as an investor in small business, how do you think it's best to find investors and network in industries in which we aren't connected?
For me, it's just going to a lot of events and throwing dinners.
Okay. Good events and dinners can never go wrong there.
Yeah, Eric, you become the host. That's what it is.
Okay. Eric, we're going to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I thought this was really interesting. Hopefully you found it interesting as well. That's all the time that we do have. Thank you, Eric, for your time again.